We've shivered from the cold in medieval huts and felt the weight of a samurai's honor. But tonight, we're going to an era of gunpowder, piety, and power. A time when an empire on which the sun never set ruled the world. And at the heart of that empire, beating like a war drum, was the most innovative, professional, and feared fighting force of its time. We're not talking about knights in shining armor. We're talking about men of iron, soldiers of fortune, hardened veterans, devout Catholics, and ruthless mercenaries, all united under one banner. We're talking about the Spanish Tercios. For almost 200 years, from the plains of Italy to the fields of Flanders and the jungles of the Americas, the Tercio was the ultimate war machine. A lethal combination of pikes, swords, and the revolutionary power of the arquebus. They were the vanguard of a global empire, the enforcers of their king's will, and the defenders of the Catholic faith. Their reputation was legendary, their discipline iron, their tenacity in battle mythical. You've been told the story of their glory, of the impossible victories, of the infantry that never retreated. But tonight, we're going to look inside that seemingly invincible formation. We're going to put you in their shoes. You are a soldier of the Tercio, and you're about to discover that your greatest enemy was not the French army or the Dutch rebels. Your greatest enemy was often the very empire you fought for. Because the story of the Tercios is not just a story of conquest, it's a story of abandonment, mutinies, and a war machine so costly that it ended up devouring its own creators. Let's set the scene. It's the 16th century. You are a young man somewhere in Spain. Maybe you're the second son of an impoverished hidalgo with no land to inherit. Or maybe you're a peasant tired of plowing the same land for a pittance. You don't have much of a future, but you hear the stories. Stories of Flanders, of Italy, of the New World. Stories of loot, of adventure, of a life beyond your dusty village. And you hear about the Tercios, the elite, the king's professional army, a place where a man, regardless of his birth, can make a name for himself, a reputation, and most importantly, a wage. Unlike the feudal armies of peasant levies, the Tercio was an army of professional volunteers, and the pay, at least in theory, was good. A common soldier, a pikeman, or an arquebusier earned several escudos a month, a salary that far exceeded what you could earn in the fields. So you enlist. You go to the recruitment post, where a captain inspects you. They're looking for strong, healthy men, capable of withstanding the hardships of the campaign. If they accept you, they give you an advance, your first pay, and assign you to a company. You say goodbye to your family. Your mother prays for your soul. Your father gives you a gruff hug. You might not come back, but the promise of a different life is too strong to ignore. Your journey begins on what was known as the Spanish Road, an epic route that took recruits from Spain, through Italy and the Alps, to the heart of the war in the Netherlands. It's a march of months, a test of endurance before you even see your first battlefield. Once in Flanders, your real education begins. You are integrated into the unique structure of the Tercio. It's not just a regiment, it's a community, a brotherhood. It's divided into companies, each with its own captain, ensign, and sergeant. But the real innovation, the one that terrified their enemies, was their combat formation. The pike square. Imagine a human hedgehog of steel. A massive square, often of more than 1,000 men. In the center and in the inner ranks are the pikemen. Like you wield a pike more than 5 meters long. A formidable spear of ash wood with a sharp steel tip. Your job is simple and terrifying. Hold the formation. You are a link in a wall of spears. In front of you, Your comrades form an impenetrable barrier that no cavalry charge can break. But the genius of the Tercio was not just in defense. It was in attack. At the corners of the square, like venomous fangs, were the sleeves of arquebusiers. These men, armed with the first clumsy muskets, were the mobile artillery of the formation. The arquebus is a cumbersome weapon. It takes forever to reload. You have to measure the powder, insert the bullet, ram the wad, place the lit match. It's a slow and dangerous process, but when it fires, the sound is thunderous, and the lead bullet can pierce a knight's armor at 100 meters. And this is where the deadly choreography of the Tercio comes into play. The square advances slowly, a monster of pikes and steel. The arquebusiers from the sleeves advance, form a line, fire a devastating volley of lead at the enemy, and then retreat to the safety of the pike square to reload. While they reload, another line of arquebusiers advances, fires, and retreats. It's a constant cycle of fire and steel, a walking fortress that could defend against cavalry and decimate enemy infantry from a distance. And if the enemy managed to get close, if the battle turned into a chaotic melee, then the pikemen in the front ranks would drop their pikes and draw their swords. The famous Spanish rapier, along with a dagger, turned each man into a lethal duelist. This combination of firearms and bladed weapons, of defense and attack, made the Tercio virtually invincible on the open field for more than a century. They were disciplined, experienced, and above all, incredibly tough. But what was your daily life like inside this machine? It was a life of extreme contradictions. On the one hand, you were surrounded by a deep piety. You were a soldier of the Catholic monarchy, fighting against the Protestant heretics in the Netherlands, or against the Ottoman infidels in the Mediterranean. Each company had its own chaplain. Mass was celebrated before battle. The rosary was prayed. Many soldiers wore medals of the Virgin Mary or of Santiago Matamoros, the patron saint of Spain. You believed, with unshakable faith, that you were fighting God's war. On the other hand, when you weren't fighting, life was a mixture of boredom, gambling, and vice. You spent months in garrisons, in the cold, damp cities of Flanders. Your pay, when it arrived, was quickly spent in taverns, on dice, and on the prostitutes who followed the army everywhere. A mobile camp of services and desperation. Fights were common. A soldier's honor was as important as his pay. An insult, a wrong look, a dispute over a game of cards. It could all end with knives in a dark alley. Life was cheap, and death an old acquaintance. You got used to the hardships, to sleeping in the mud, to marching in the incessant rain, to eating hardtack as hard as rocks, often infested with weevils. You got used to seeing your comrades die, not just in battle, but from the diseases that ravaged the camps. But there was one thing you never got used to, one thing that became the greatest threat to the empire and the recurring nightmare of your life. The Spanish Empire, despite all the gold and silver arriving from the New World, was perpetually on the verge of bankruptcy. The wars on multiple fronts were incredibly expensive, and often the money simply did not arrive. Pay was delayed for months, sometimes for years. Imagine you've been fighting, bleeding, and dying for your king. In the fields of Flanders, you haven't seen your family in a decade. You're tired, wounded, and hungry, and you're not getting paid. At first, you complain. The captain promises that the pay is on its way. You wait. Months go by. The promise becomes empty. Your loyalty, forged in faith and duty, begins to erode and is replaced by a cold, pragmatic anger. And then the mutiny happens. This was not a simple protest. It was an organized takeover. The soldiers of one or several tercios elected their own leaders, the electos, and declared that they would stop serving the king until they were paid what they were owed. They would seize a city, fortify it, and refuse to fight. They were not deserters. They saw themselves as professionals, demanding that their contract be fulfilled. They created their own republic within the occupied city, with their own laws and their own system of justice. And they waited. For the Spanish Empire, a mutiny was a catastrophe. It paralyzed the army at a crucial moment. A strategic city like Antwerp could be taken by its own defenders. The crown, humiliated, was forced to negotiate. They sent emissaries with promises, with gold, with pardons, but sometimes patience ran out, and the mutiny turned into a sack. The most infamous example is the Spanish Fury of 1576. After months without pay, the mutinous Tercios in the Netherlands unleashed themselves on the prosperous city of Antwerp. For 3 days, the city was subjected to a sack of apocalyptic brutality. Houses were burned, thousands of citizens were murdered, women were raped, and everything of value was stolen. It was an orgy of violence that shattered Spain's reputation in Europe and united the Dutch provinces, both Catholic and Protestant, in a common revolt against their oppressor. You as a soldier faced an impossible choice: remain loyal to a king who was letting you starve, or join your comrades in mutiny, risking execution as a traitor, but with the hope of getting your pay. There were no easy answers. For more than a century, the Tercio seemed invincible, but the world was changing. Military tactics evolved. New types of muskets, lighter and faster to reload, began to appear. Field artillery became more mobile and powerful. The rigid formation of the pike square, once its greatest strength, became its greatest weakness. It was a large, slow target for enemy cannons. The symbolic moment of the end came in 1643 at the Battle of Rocroi. A brilliant young French general, the Duke of Enghien, faced the veteran Spanish Tercios. Instead of charging blindly against the wall of pikes, he used his artillery and cavalry intelligently, flanking and wearing down the Spanish formation. For hours, the Tercios held on, as they always had. Surrounded, outnumbered, they refused to surrender. They formed one last, defiant square, a monument of pride and resistance. But in the end, the French artillery shattered them. For the first time in 150 years, a Spanish Tercio was decisively defeated on the battlefield. It was not the end of the Tercio, but it was the beginning of the end. The war machine that had dominated Europe had become obsolete, too slow, too rigid, too expensive for an empire that was crumbling under the weight of its own ambitions. When you finally retire, if you do, you don't return to a glorious and rich Spain. You return to a country exhausted, impoverished by the endless wars that you yourself fought. The gold from the New World had passed through Spain like a fever, leaving behind inflation, debt, and a nobility that despised work. You sit on your small plot of land with your scars and your memories. You are the ghost of an empire, a walking testament to an era of unshakable faith and limitless brutality. The story of the Spanish Tercios is the story of a paradox. They were, without a doubt, one of the most formidable fighting forces in history, but they were also the instruments and the victims of a system that demanded absolute loyalty, but often offered only broken promises in return. They were not simple soldiers. They were a brotherhood forged in faith, discipline, and shared suffering. They fought with a courage that amazed their enemies, but they also mutinied, sacked, and committed atrocities in the name of a salary that rarely arrived. So the next time you think of the Spanish Golden Age, don't just think of the poets and the painters. Think of the anonymous soldier of the Tercio, with his 5-meter pike, his smoking arquebus, and his worn rosary. The man who carried an empire on his shoulders, and who, in the end, was consumed by the same fire he helped to light.